thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'll be talking about cystic fibrosis, the condition that I suffer with myself, because this is a very personal thing to myself. And it's very important to me. So first, a little bit of background information as to what cystic fibrosis is. So it is a hereditary condition that mainly affects the lungs and the pancreas. This is caused by mucus building up within the lungs, causing scarring, which then can lead to breathing difficulties. The mucus can also block the pancreatic ducts, intestines, and bronchi, which again leads to a whole host of complications. And a nice little diagram there for you. So what do people associate cystic fibrosis with? In preparation for this talk, I did a little Mentimeter and had some of my friends and colleagues write down some words that they associate. And as you can see, the main ones are pancreas, sweat, and lungs. You can also see a few different ones, including the movie 5 Feet Apart, if any of you have watched that. What's the common theme with what people associate cystic fibrosis with? With hidden disabilities, people tend to think of the physical aspects, the things that people can see, lungs, sweat, pancreas, all these things can manifest in physical things that people can see. Now, a little history as to what cystic fibrosis is. It was first diagnosed in 1938 by the lovely Dorothy Anderson, as you can see here. Basically, she observed that there was a mysterious disease taking the life of children. These children had numerous scars and fluid-built cysts in their lungs, and she attributed this to cystic fibrosis of the pancreas, which then became just known as cystic fibrosis. As time went on, more symptoms began to be associated with cystic fibrosis, including salt and sweat, which came about because there was a heat wave in New York when Dr. Paul was observing people who had cystic fibrosis, and because of the heat wave, this then caused them to sweat profusely. And he thought, fantastic, that's another thing we can add to it. But is this the end? Is this where we should stop the history of cystic fibrosis with its first diagnosis? I don't personally think so. As there are proverbs, there is autopsies out there, and there is a lovely man by the name of Chopin who we will talk about at the end. So the proverbs. If you don't know, a proverb is essentially a little piece of information that's passed down from generation to generation, tends to follow some sort of like a rhyme. So the first proverb is, "A child that tastes salty when kissed will soon die." This is from a 1906 Spanish source, 10 Privileges of a Pregnant Woman, which is this source that you can see here. Another one, "Woe to the child who tastes salty when kissed on the forehead. He is bewitched and soon must die." A 15th century one, which is an Irish proverb. "The child that will soon die whose brow tastes salty when kissed" is a Swiss one. Now this one, I can't really track the date just because an issue with oral history is you don't really know where it started. What is something that is consistent throughout these? Sweat and salt. Woe to a child who has salty sweat, woe to a child who does sweat. Now, one of the reasons that these people may have pointed it out is that it's unusual. All three of these countries have very different climates, and yet sweat is a constant. Again, it is a visible thing. It's something that you can see, and oddly in this case, taste. It's concerning. Likely children of these proverbs were young due to the nature of cystic fibrosis and the lower life expectancy. And one of the tests now for cystic fibrosis is the sweat test. You get this nice little watch which fills up with sweat, and then they test the salt content. And as well, babies don't sweat as much as adults. So if you've got this little child who's profusely sweating, you're going to be concerned. And finally, it is specific to cystic fibrosis. You can clearly see that it is salty sweat. It's not just sweat. This is specific to people who suffer with cystic fibrosis, as there is issues transporting sodium through the cell membranes. So naturally, sodium chloride, this builds up, and there we are. And we can also see a little bit of like this representation of how hidden disabilities are being represented in the past through the occult. You can see by the different proverbs that there is bewitchment, there is hexing, and even the Spanish one, which might not outwardly state that these children are bewitched. A lot of its sources come from occultist sources. They come from various mystics, and it talks a lot about the soul and the dangers to do with it. Now for an important autopsy. There was an autopsy performed in 1595 by Patmore in the Netherlands, I think, where basically he cut open this girl who had persistent symptoms for 8 years, and these had been worsened by winter. When he cut her open, he found that the pancreas was gleaming white and was almost pickled, weirdly. There was tons of cysts to do with it. He just attributed this to a random weird thing. Didn't write much about it. He just said she had a gleaming white pancreas, and that was a day's work. So we unfortunately don't know much about the girl as well. And I'd like to ask you I'd like you to think of these questions. Did the girl being labelled as Hex result in her being ostracised or looked down upon? Were her parents worried about seeking professional help when she was labelled as being hexed? And what was the impact of her condition beyond that she had unusual symptoms? And I'd like you to keep these things in your head as I'm talking about Frederick Chopin. Now, who is Frederick Chopin? You may know him. He's a famous Polish composer. He's best known for a composition of Nocturne in E-flat major, number 2. If any of you do music, you've probably came across it. And he is a divisive figure in the world of medical history in regards to his condition. What was his condition? Well, he suffered with bouts of coughing fits. These often left him, fatigued. They often left him bedridden. He had issues maintaining weight. He was only 5'7" and was 40 kilograms. He suffered terribly in the winter. Again, he suffered with coughing. His joints tended to swell up because of the cold. He also had issues digesting food, which again attributed to his weight loss. People thought that he was infertile. He had no known biological children, yet sent a lot of letters to women wanting children. As well, at the time of his death, this was all attributed to tuberculosis. How did this affect him? The impact of the winter was that he had quite often escaped it. Now, he was quite a wealthy man, so he could go on holiday to Mallorca, which not all of us can do. He opted for a high carbohydrate diet as he found that fatty foods tended to trigger his digestive issues. And his lover, who wrote a lovely book called A Winter in Mallorca about his vacations to Mallorca, usually had to hand make his food, mainly just to avoid any cross-contamination. And again, he was often left fatigued playing the piano. This especially affected him in his later life, as he had to cancel a lot of shows. In the latter part of his life, just before he died, he was meant to do a couple of shows where he went down from Edinburgh all the way down to London. And he only could play 3 of them, and he was supposed to play 15 shows. Now, I asked you a couple of minutes ago to think about the little girl. Now, we have a lot of information about Frederick Chopin. We have all his letters. We have his lover was an avid writer, so she wrote a lot of books about him. Imagine if we had this amount of information about the young girl. Imagine all the things that we would know about people who lived with a cystic fibrosis-like condition. And this is unfortunately where my research was, halted. Because of the nature of hidden disabilities, they are quite often overlooked, especially in a historical standpoint. And a lot of the time, all these sources were about, dead people who had suffered with, and you don't get to see their lives. And for me, it is their lives that are important. It's these kind of stories that are important to me. As someone who has cystic fibrosis, I imagine if anyone else has a hidden disability and looks into the history of their hidden disability, you get a sense of comfort, a sense of camaraderie, that these people in the past lived with what you live with, that I have existed for hundreds of years. And for me, this is why I did it. This is why I did this research. And I do ask this question, whether we should stop a history of a disability at its first diagnosis, or whether we should look back, whether we should look at symptoms that are similar to these hidden disabilities. And yeah, thanks.